Good afternoon or good morning. Welcome to this panel presentation, which is focused on the collaborative partnerships, which research tells us is effective. And I think for us and our experience, and many of you in your experience, we know that these collaborative partnerships are crucial for successful transitions from high school into adulthood for students with disabilities. So that's what our panel presentation will be about today. My name is Catherine Fowler. I am a co-director with the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, the Collaborative, and I am privileged to be able to serve as the moderator for this esteemed panel that I will get to introduce you to in just a moment. These folks are really the experts who are doing the work of collaboration in their states and regions from across the country, so look forward to hearing from them. We can move to the next slide. Just to give our thanks to OSEP, of course, for hosting this conference, and to AIR for pulling all of this together. I also want to acknowledge, so OSEP clearly funds our Technical Assistance Center jointly with the Rehabilitation Services Administration, so we appreciate that. And I also want to thank and acknowledge Alicia Walters and Brianne Berger and Celeste Avoke, each with OSEP, who've really planned this panel for you today. And look forward to each of you participating, and glad that you're with us to listen and engage and take part for the next hour and a half. And we can move on to the next slide. So this is what we hope that you will get from our time together. We think if you're here, you probably value the importance of collaboration, but we'll talk about that a bit. You'll get some quick glimpses, relatively quick glimpses, in the collaborative work that's occurring in secondary education and transition services from various perspectives around the country. So from the southeastern region of the United States, as well as specific state work and local level work in Ohio and Oregon and Pennsylvania. So you'll hear from those individuals, and really digging into, I think you all probably also appreciate that meaningful collaboration is not easy. It's not surface level stuff. It's not quick. And so our panelists are going to spend a little bit of time talking about the work that's really required for that meaningful, sustainable collaboration. In the wake of the most challenging 16 months that we've been through in many of our schools and other services, we want to talk a little bit about how current and future challenges, not only for all students with disabilities, but maybe for specific populations of students with disabilities, how collaboration and partnerships may be a mechanism for overcoming some of those challenges. So we hope that we'll get a little bit of time to talk with and engage with you all on those topics in the next bit of time, and we can move on. So with that, I get to introduce our panel. You're going to hear from each of these individuals in their own right, and they'll get to talk a little bit about their work. But I'll start by introducing Dennis Gilliam. He is the Executive Director of Special Projects for the Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind. And pardon me, I do have to refer to my notes here as I make these introductions. One of the several projects that Dr. Gilliam manages is the National Technical Institute for the Deaf Regional STEM Center, and that's the work that he's going to talk a little bit about today. Dennis hails from Talladega, Alabama, and for each of our panelists, you can see much more about them in their bios that are posted, but we're just going to share a little bit right now before you get to know them. Dan Finley is with the Oregon Department of Education. He's an education specialist responsible for supporting career and technical education programs in the engineering and industrial areas at the secondary level. Dan has been an active member of the secondary transition team from Oregon, focused on supporting students with disabilities and their successful transitions and engagement with career and technical education. So welcome to Dan. And then Amy Zemansky is a consultant with the Ohio Department of Education. Amy is the statewide secondary transition and workforce development consultant at the State Support Team Region 1. Amy leads numerous projects with the Ohio Department of Education Office of Exceptional Children, and Amy's also leads Ohio's interdisciplinary team that's focused on secondary transition and students with disabilities. So welcome to Amy. And moving on, Everett Deibler is a learning specialist at Lehigh Carbon Community College, where he, not surprisingly, coordinates accessibility services and accessibility efforts for students with disabilities at the college, and also supports the college's Inclusive Higher Education Initiative. On this panel today, Everett's going to be reflecting on his work previously as a youth, but more recently in the last decade as an adult ally supporting youth through a variety of initiatives with both the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, Lehigh Valley Center for Independent Living, the Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network, and other ways that he's been engaged in promoting youth leadership and engagement and transition. And then finally on our panel, Dr. Hillary Mankus, and Hillary is with the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Center, more familiar to us as PaTTAN. She's an educational consultant at PaTTAN in Pittsburgh and co-leads the Secondary Transition Initiative for Pennsylvania. So we welcome this group. We are excited to have you share what you've been doing, and I know that each of you brings sort of a different perspective related to collaboration, related to how important that is to transition. So we look forward to hearing from them. And moving on to the next slide, just to share what we hope the audience will be doing during this session. So we look forward to you listening, of course, but really listening for, I mentioned that collaboration has a research base. It's a predictor of post-school success, a research-based predictor of post-school success, as are other aspects that you will hear a little bit about today. So certainly career and technical education and student participation in that. You're certainly going to hear about that from Dennis and from Dan and from Amy. Family involvement, family expectations. I know Everett and Hillary are going to speak to that. Student self-determination skills. So these are all predictors of post-school success that are fostered through these collaborations that you're going to hear more about. So be listening for that. Certainly be thinking of questions and entering those questions in the box on your screen. That's what we will work from as we get to the end of our time together. And we do have a couple of polls along the way, so pay attention, be ready to participate, and we look forward to spending time with you in the next not quite hour, an hour and 20 minutes. So we do appreciate you being involved. And one of the handouts that will be posted, if it's not yet, is the contact information for our panelists. So also plan, to follow up if you have questions or want to know a little bit more specifically about a program that you don't get to hear enough about today. Please be sure to follow up. And thank you for your time. And with that, I believe we will be turning it over to Dennis.
Can you hear me, Catherine? Hi there. I'm hoping that we have an effective microphone. That was a little bit of a difficulty early on, so thank you so much. I'm sure I will get some level of response if it's not working. So I'm Dennis Gilliam. I work with the National Technical Institute for the Deaf Regional STEM Center. That's a lot to say at one time, but I will tell you that I am the Alabama representative for that. I do have a partner in crime at the National Technical Institute for the Deaf in Rochester, New York. It's Dr. Denise Caven. So I do think that effective partnerships naturally have to recognize your cohorts and your peers. So that's important for me to say from the get-go. So this program really was something that started 5 years ago. It really is a melding between the K-12 and post-secondary environments. So I'm glad that it was mentioned earlier that with true collaboration, that's where success is seen. So if you'll go to the next slide, John, we'll see that there are several things that we do. A lot of people say, well, what is your STEM center? Well, STEM is very important, naturally, but that focus on STEM has come, science, technology, engineering, and math, has really grown exponentially within the last 10 years. But I think it's very important, I might be preaching to the choir here, but it's important in our special populations or low incidence populations that most of our subject specific emphasis goes big, small. And I mean by that it goes from this big corporate or societal need to our general education environment, and then to special education, and in our case, in this low incidence population of deaf education. So it's important for us to recognize that special populations, they get the information, but it's typically very late in the game. And you got to think, here I'm in Alabama. I recognize my own faults. I know that we tend to be a little bit behind the game, but if you're talking about special populations being delayed anyway, and then getting it in Alabama, sometimes we're really about 5-10 years behind the curve when it comes to important topics or trends in education. So if you go on to the next slide, trying to stay on time here. The important thing that we worked with is a National STEM Center, which brings a lot of the information that the National Technical Institute for the Deaf, which is abbreviated NTID, it's located at Rochester Institute of Technology. What it brings is all the information and all the knowledge and all the expectations that you might have going into an institution for the deaf that is located on an Institute for Technology, which is a mainstream environment. And what we attempt to do is to take that information that is needed and combine it with the expertise that might be at the local level. So we work here at the Alabama Institute for Deaf and Blind in Talladega, Alabama. And you see that next bullet. I did say, yes, I did say Alabama. The important part of that is the Alabama Institute for Deaf and Blind is not just a small little microcosm in a small town in Alabama. We actually have 9 regional centers across the state that serve students with that are special populations. So what we knew is that we could expand out the service area. So when we partner with NTID, we determined that we started with a 9-state area, and we're able to serve at the beginning Mississippi, Louisiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, that whole eastern area, that's kind of the SEC area, the southeastern area. And within the last couple of years, we expanded to a 12-state area, which included Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Next slide, please. As we looked to what was important there, let's go to the next slide. What was important is to replicate best practices that we were seeing in STEM education and transitioning those to make them deaf-friendly and UDL practical. So an example of that might be that we try to help teachers understand that 90% of the populations of students who are deaf and hard of hearing are served in a mainstream environment. And what we have there is strategies that help them understand. So for example, when that slide came up and John hit that next slide, the folks of, no, I'm sorry, previous slide, when I was, the phraseology was, when I said next slide, it brought up a slide where most people who could hear were reading and hearing me at the same time. So where they were reading, replicating best practices regarding STEM education. And what they were able to do is to take in both the auditory and the visual input, but deaf and hard of hearing individuals cannot do that. So what happens is we give them strategies. For example, make sure as you're doing PowerPoints or presentations, give those folks an opportunity to read slides before you start talking, because you're giving them an option of, do I want to pay attention to the slide or to the presenter? So that's one example. Sorry about the confusion with the slide. We also want to make sure all of the STEM opportunities are accessible to our students, so that we do live in a visual environment, but we want to make sure that we're not limiting that to only auditory input, and that's important. And as we continue to grow those strategies and opportunities, it really gives us an opportunity for universal design for learning. It gives us opportunities for the instructional environment to be better. And what we do with all the information that we've collected, not only from the National Technical Institute for the Deaf, but sister organizations across the Southeastern nation, is we're able to take that information and disseminate it to a network of folks across the Southeast and even nationally, to make sure that people have that information and can use it on a daily basis. That is important to us because we want to make sure that our folks are getting opportunities that typically they wouldn't have. Next slide, please. So some examples of that would be, give me that next slide, please. Examples of giving them different experiences. There's a picture of a young lady there that went to a marine lab, and that's in Key Largo. This young lady now has graduated and has decided to pursue a field in marine biology. So we have different camps and weekend activities across the Southeast that gives deaf and hard of hearing individuals that that opportunity to grow and to see that they can do things such as marine biology, mechatronic engineering, cybersecurity. The important part of that is to go through a train the trainer process. So we have regional trainings that are set up for teachers of the teachers for the deaf and those service providers. Also, we try to make sure that all of those programs are not only available for our deaf and hard of hearing students, but also those typically hearing students that want to meld in there. And anything that is provided to a typically hearing student, we want to make sure that those students who have a hearing difference have that opportunity to attend as well. So we're developing those sister agencies and relationships. And the relationships that we are developing in those states, all of the 9 states, now 12, has really benefited the students that we serve and the clients we serve. Next slide, please. So what we've seen is that in the first year, we only had about 100 services for our students and our clients. We've now over 3,000 this past year. Importantly is to note that the National and Technical Institute for the Deaf showed an increase of enrollment from those 12 states for 20% after we started this program. What we think is critical in that area is that when we look at college readiness, college and career readiness, but the preparing students to get into that post-secondary environment, we've seen that by giving them the access to the STEM education, access to the curriculum through those methodologies, that they're more prepared as they go into a post-secondary environment, and they're actually more willing. That's why we see the 20% increase. And we developed the first robotics competition where all students who are deaf, or teams with students who are deaf, participated, and we were very pleased to help sponsor a group of folks from North Carolina that won the Inspire Award at the national competition, the VEX World Competition, and in Kentucky this past year. So we've seen a lot of great improvement. It's just connecting the dots. Next slide, please, and I'll try to wrap it up. What I know that we're trying to talk about how the partnerships are, but what we think is really critical is looking for things that really make sense. So who best to talk to about K-12 and how to prepare them to get into a post-secondary environment than the people that are expecting them to succeed in that post-secondary environment. So we're looking at people that offer up the placement test, looking at the first year success rates, and then backing that down to a K-12 environment. So it's really awesome that we've been able to do that. Second encouragement I have is we've seen this a lot, and really from our side, from our instructors and from our trainers, is to realize that you can be good at your stuff, you're good at your things, and they can be good at their things, and you can come together. That really is a no-brainer. But when you have a lot of professionals that are very prideful about the work that they produce, it's sometimes difficult to have them realize you can do your job and have somebody else do their job on a different level, and then mix in the middle. It's really fantastic. And when that time comes for you to partner, regular meetings are critical for us so that we can make sure that the people, we're actually in Alabama and our partners in New York. And in this case, we want to make sure that we meet with them regularly, because not only is there a distance, but the population of students sometimes is a little different. So it's really important to us to communicate regularly and to let them let us know what our next events are, so that we can keep communication lines open all of the time. I think I'm all done on my time. I tried to stay pretty close. Next slide, please. If there are any questions that we run into, you can reach out to our website or email me directly, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. So let me turn that over to the next presenter.
That's great, Dennis. Thank you. And those outcomes that you're already seeing from your time with this project are encouraging. And there were a couple things that you said that I think we know, but it's good to be reminded that building the relationships piece, those regular meetings, I think we all get worn out with meetings, but we know that having those regular check-ins are really important to those relationships. And then some good reminders about universal design and inclusion and, those positive outcomes. Leaving that pride at the door is definitely, that's a good one. We have a lot of experts in the room, so that's helpful to be reminded. And those partnerships with post-secondary education, I know are critical for the work, particularly the work in STEM and CTE. So thank you. And I know we'll have more questions coming in. With that, we're going to move on to our next panelist, Daniel Finley. So appreciate you being with us. And Dan's going to also speak to CTE and the involvement of students with disabilities more broadly, not just students who are deaf and blind, but deaf and or blind, but students in general in Oregon. So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine. And I want to acknowledge and thank Dennis for surfacing some very important things, the ideas of best practices, the ideas of understandings, and the key pivotal idea of communication. When you really get down to it, communication is what it's all about, and it's how we're able to pull together as very unique individual groups and organizations in our particular states and regions to solve problems. Because if we don't know what's going on with our colleagues, we really can't solve problems together. And you'll notice that in the preamble here, the first slide, we're going to be talking about awareness, engagement, and continuous improvement. So next slide, please. So essentially, awareness for us in our situation is across different groups, across different teams and organizations. We found out number one, that some of the organizations, in fact, the Enhancing Student Opportunities Office, which is one of the offices within the Oregon Department of Education, or the ESO office, was located or co-located in the same building with us. They were across the floor from us. And because we in organizations like states and so forth tend to be a little bit siloed, we really didn't know they were there. And I know that's shocking to say, but I would guess that when we look across people's experiences, others have run into that. Our colleagues in ESO were looking at building relationships with career and technical education, CTE, because they realized that there were advantages to be had in helping students intentionally and thoughtfully approach careers. There was an incident that happened, as does happen in our organizations, where some bad decisions were made in some places. There was a finding and there was corrective action, which led to us working with NTACT, the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, for 4 years on intensive technical assistance. And during that time, a number of things happened. And probably the most important one of those was that the different organizations discovered each other. The Enhancing Student Opportunities group, which focused on students with disabilities and special education, discovered CTE. And upon having conversations about what we do and how we do it, and some people from my particular team traveling to a capacity building institute in Denver, we realized that for the most part, the people in special education and students with disabilities didn't understand CTE. We didn't understand them. And there was a real struggle in grasping all of the opportunities. So what do you do when you run into a problem like that? You sit down, you break bread, you have conversations, and that's exactly what we did. Using our energy and our skills and our thoughtfulness, we first of all said, where are we weak? Where can we be stronger by working together? And it was in discovering the work that's being done by our various partners, by the Transition Technical Assistance Network partners, the Youth Transition partners, the Pre-Employment Transition Services partners, the people in CTE, in post-secondary and secondary that we found common ground and started to have some really robust conversations. It was engaging at that Capacity Building Institute that really helped us get a tremendous movement forward. Further, we have a really robust organization within the state of Oregon, the Oregon Career and Technical Education Network, or CTE network, that comprises 17 CTE regions. And what we do in those regions is regional coordinators help provide the structure for licensure, for career and technical education program approvals and things of that nature. This was another group of individuals who became tremendous allies in this work because we were able to help them understand, partnering up with our new friends, how youth transitions and how PaTTAN could make a difference in the individual schools and districts. We have 197 districts in Oregon. Some of them are very large. Some of them have seriously 12 to 15 students in the secondary program, and so are very small, which people do not necessarily understand about Oregon. We're quite geographically diverse. Another group that proved to be very important, we have a relationship and have had a relationship for a number of years with the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity, or NAEP, and their PIPE project, which is all about developing the strongest ways of expanding the impact of equity within our programs. For a number of years, we focused on equity in across race and ethnicity and representation of groups in career and technical education. We're now moving on and looking at some other projects that will involve investigating the impact of career and technical education on students with disabilities. We have a pretty good idea that it does make a difference. We don't know where we're weak and where we're strong and where things are just simply working serendipitously. So we're looking at doing some additional work and sorting through that. I want to talk a little bit about continuous improvement, collaborative planning, or collaborative plan development, looking at the side of the ledger at students with disabilities and SPED, the importance of planning together. And in fact, after completing this year's Capacity Building Institute, which was virtual, we pulled our team, which represents a wide variety of individuals and groups, together and continued to work on the Enhancing Student Opportunities plan together and have planks in it reflecting various elements, including career and technical education and looking at transition and the relationships that can be built within the post-secondary space. And then finally, our state plan for Perkins 5, the federal legislation that underpins career and technical education. It's been a great deal of focus on making sure that we have equity positioned forward, flexible learning being a strong emphasis. In fact, that is one of our 5 planks of our state plan this year, and is something that we find incredibly important in making sure that we have that structure so that students can bring their learning and present it in the way that works best for them. This is going to be a long haul because it's a very complex, rich conversation. And it's also thinking differently because we in education tend to think about things in the ways and along the models that we've used for years. So we're looking at doing new things there. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about, and mindful of time, our visions as we build our state plan in Oregon, reimagining and transforming the learner experience to enhance prospects for all students, empowering communities, and ensuring equity and inclusivity. And probably the most interesting thing being the element of flexible learning. All learners will benefit from flexible learning systems that allow Oregonians to gain necessary skills where and how it best meets their needs. If we learned anything in the last year and a half under COVID, and we were pretty locked down in the state of Oregon, we had very few school districts that operated through the pandemic, and those were the very sparsely populated districts in extreme eastern and southeastern Oregon. We did everything by distance. We don't know if we did everything as well as we could. In fact, we're still learning right now the impact of the things that we did and how that affected all of the students, regardless of their individual circumstances. But flexible learning is something that definitely strikes us as being critical, because not everyone approaches things in the same way. Flexible is not less. Flexible is not in any way diminution of what we're trying to do with students and how we're trying to support them. Next slide, please. So the student experience is something else that's extremely important to us. As we've worked with our partners, we have looked very carefully at some similarities. We ran a little side project here about a year ago. Some individuals from the Transition Technical Assistance Network, or PaTTANs, working with me and several other people from our office, and we started mapping across from pre-ETS to CTE. And we discovered that the career and technical education process that's followed in our schools in terms of introducing students to opportunities is very similar to pre-ETS. In fact, the only thing we don't do is post-secondary counseling. That's really the only difference. So we were encouraged by that and found that we had some good, strong foundation for further conversations. The emerging and evolving concept that all students are welcome, and helping to equip teachers, coordinators, and so forth with the information they need to understand how different systems and networks work to support students. Work-based learning experience and future focus is of paramount importance. Work-based learning is our deliverable for Perkins reporting for the state of Oregon. And I was really encouraged when Dennis was talking about the young future marine biologist who has found her direction, found her bliss, and is heading off to do things that make a lot of sense to her. And it's giving students of all types the opportunity to have those experiences. We have been trying to foster that to the greatest degree possible. There was an effort a couple of years ago. Individuals from PaTTANs and youth transitions found out across the state, completed a number of touch points with folks in the field, and it gave regional coordinators who helped drive CTE out in the field more information about the programs that were available to them to help support students. This leads to much deeper incorporation of students of all types into work-based learning experiences. And since we're really measuring that in a way that we've never done before in the state, work-based learning should provide us with a good vehicle to move forward. Industry recognized credentials, another element that all students will have access to because of the way that we have our system designed. Understanding that there's theoretical and practical knowledge involved in the career areas, and it's the practical that really gets the students engaged by making sure that we have students incorporated to the greatest extent possible. That gives them a much stronger foundation from which to make decisions, and presenting people with a program, not an assortment of electives. We all love electives. They do a lot of good, and they cultivate student interest, but the idea of providing a program that is thematic, that is success directed, very important. Next slide, please. I'm going to run through just a couple of data slides, and I don't want to make a huge, take a lot of our time on this because we can go down some interesting rabbit holes here. But we look at post-school outcomes data, and quite frankly, our group working in CTE, we were pretty much blissfully ignorant of the existence of post-school outcomes because it was not part of the vocabulary that we followed. But in working with, sharing data, and sitting down and having conversations with folks, it supported the notion that, as you can see from the graphs here, as we have moved forward in time, non-CTE concentrators with disabilities and CTE concentrators with disabilities, significant difference in moving on to those things that happen after the secondary experience. While there is growth, there's good, solid evidence here that we're seeing evolve that indicates to us that getting students involved with CTE is critical. Next slide, please. So you had an opportunity to see the numbers for students moving on, and I just wanted to share with you briefly to further substantiate, and this is information that will be very familiar to pretty much all of you and is really a national phenomenon, the idea that having students placed in a position where they're able to concentrate on CTE and work authentically and enthusiastically in areas that they find compelling to them correlates positively with higher graduation rates. And this gives you an idea retrospectively of our graduation rates with the cohorts starting in the years indicated there, and the differences between the statewide average. CTE does make a difference, and we contend it makes a difference for all individuals. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next graph. This one's a little hard to read, and I apologize ahead of this, but really the whole idea behind this graph is that it shows the difference in the gaps for individuals. Those of you who are familiar with career and technical education and the way programs are structured can get a good feel for this, because what we're looking at here is the number of participants, those who enter the program and have at least a half credit of experience in a program, and those who are concentrators, who are doing more than 2 credits or more of focus. And there's naturally a drop-off between people who start a program and people who continue it and concentrate on it, whether it's I've lost interest, it's not working for me, I found something I like better. And so we naturally tend to see a difference between the number of people who participate and the numbers who ultimately concentrate. What we saw for a number of years was that the gaps between students experiencing disabilities and those not were different, and there was a bigger gap. And I can turn to some of my notes here. In 2011, the difference between concentrators was, and concentrators plus a higher level of measurement was 12 and 8%. By 2018, the gap was 9 and 6. So it's not perfect, because what we would love to see is those individuals who enter as a participant continuing on as a concentrator and then entering their lives after secondary. That's probably not necessarily realistic, but what we do want to see is a tighter connection that students make with an area. When we see a drop-off and we see a disconnection, we don't necessarily understand why. And that's one reason why we're curious about these numbers and tend to have conversations on a regular basis about how we can get that to be clearer, gain a better understanding, but also make the experience for all students such that we have higher numbers of concentrators in areas. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide, please. So our key plan focus area is really tightening our connections to workforce and employer needs. So we do regional and local needs assessments, increasing engagement with students, parents, community organizations, and the groups you see here. And that includes building additional bridges with our colleagues in different offices, agencies, and functions to make sure that we're giving individuals the best support that we can probably that we can possibly do. Rich opportunities for students to gain the real world experiences to find out if they really want to be there in that area. And of course, career exploration beginning at least in middle school and extending through adult education for all students. And I will throw in that because we have some questions about what is most effective and most impactful about CTE for all students, and we have data that don't necessarily give us the story, we're falling back on the idea that quantitative data tell you what happened. Qualitative data give you an idea of why it happened. We're going to be engaging in a research study with several partners to look at student performance, post-school outcomes, and graduation rates over the last maybe 10 to 12 years, and try to sort out through interviews and other vehicles why people come, why people stay, why people go, relative to career programs, and how we can help improve the accessibility for all individuals. Sort of getting the encouragement to move on here. So I'm going to go to the, if we could take a look at the last slide. Contact information, if you'd like to reach out, would love to hear from you. Also, there's a tiny URL or a QR code here. I grabbed several resources that I think you'll find interesting that speak to the way that we use data and the way that we work with our partners and the organizations. That will give you some additional information. Questions anytime, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I'll turn it back over to Catherine so we can move on to our next speaker.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you for the walking through. I mean, I've been familiar with that, but walking through the way you all have really looked at the data and are continuing to examine that and use that with your partners. And that's all, I know, central to the conversations that you all have, and talking about breaking bread and getting on the same page and kind of finding that common ground. I know I'm familiar with the work that you all have done, and so I appreciate you sharing that. I'll turn it over to Amy in Ohio, who is also bringing sort of the special education side of the work that they've been doing with career and technical education over the last few years as well. And we're going to expand into some other areas, but know that CTE is a big focus of the partnerships with in many states. So I wanted to spend some time with that. So Amy.
All right. Thanks so much, Catherine. I'm really excited to be here today to highlight the partnerships that we find are very crucial to post-secondary success for students with disabilities in Ohio. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. I'm going to start, actually I can go one more slide. Thank you. I'm going to start by describing, as Catherine said, what I would consider an incredible partnership between the Ohio Department of Education's Office for Exceptional Children and Office of Career Technical Education. Unfortunately, my partner in crime, Brenna Bartlett, is unable to be with us today, but I did make sure to include her contact information here on the slide, and it's also listed again at the end of my slide presentation. So if you have any questions or comments for her, I'm sure she'd be happy to speak with you at another time. Dan, also, I just want to mention, I cannot wait to talk with you more about career tech because, gosh, there's so many opportunities for cross-state collaboration that I think we would like to explore here in Ohio. So what is so noteworthy about our partnership? I would say it wasn't built overnight, that's for sure. And it certainly didn't happen by accident. About 4.5 years ago, I hosted an off-site day-long meeting with the department's career tech and special education leadership. And I'd say at that time, the state of kind of how we worked within the department between those two offices was really comparable to that which Dan shared in terms of siloing and just not always working as collaboratively as we could be. So our goal for the meeting was to determine what's our common message, right? What's our common message for serving students with disabilities in career technical pathways? And what do we need to do? What are our next steps to improve that service delivery? It was a big undertaking, probably a little too ambitious, but I was naive and I thought I could do it. So we just dug right in, and I won't get too specific about the day's agenda, but I will say we started that meeting at square one. We didn't break bread, but we definitely started back at the beginning, back at the basics. We reviewed special education and career technical vocabulary. We looked at legislation that impacted both of our office work. We talked about roles and responsibilities. We just wanted to make sure that everyone was, had at least the same base knowledge before we could move forward, and that everybody had a chance to kind of share who they were, what they were doing, what their why was, And I think it was really this level setting that we did that made a difference. It was also really important. People had said to me after the meeting that the fact that we were able to take a chunk of time as well as go off site really allowed them to focus and immerse themselves in the work. So if you're considering something about offsite, is it worth it? Is it worth it to spend the whole day? I'm going to say for sure, yes. It really made a difference in the work that we did. And actually, we walked out of that meeting, I'd like to say with a common message, but not delivered at that point, not right at that point, but it set the stage for several years of continuous work, right? We had lots of standard planning meetings, just like the others have explained so far in the presentation, and really got to a point where we were able to develop not only a common message for equitable access and provision of service, but we developed a self-review tool that our schools can use to make sure that they're moving forward and really meeting the criteria that we hope to see statewide in terms of implementation. We also right now have 8 career technical planning district consultants who work with our teams locally throughout the state to provide high quality professional development and technical assistance to get the work done. And our next steps for collaboration, we've kind of started some of this work, but I really see this as a big focus as we move forward, is on Perkins 5 Equity Lab. We also partner with NAEP and have done some pretty cool work with bringing in local teams from career technical centers to look at their data and establish plans on how to best address the needs of special populations and subgroups. So stay tuned. I know we have right now a really robust website. If you do a search for Ohio Department of Education and look up Perkins Equity Lab, you'll see some great resources that Becky Krantz, who worked with Brenna, has developed. And then I guess another thing I want to mention here is that all of this work is outlined also in our Perkins 5 plan. We know that that's where we really can garner a credibility, right? And ensure that we're going to have accountability and sustainability. So however you can tie any of the work that you do into the bigger picture of plans for your state agencies, I think the better off you're going to be in order to keep things moving forward. Next slide, please. In terms of cross-agency collaboration, so we obviously do a lot of cross-office collaboration at the department. We also at the Department of Education have a collaboration with the Vocational Rehabilitation Agency in Ohio, and that is the Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. We call it OOD. Some people call it OOD. I stick with OOD. The department and OOD established what we call the Ohio Transition Support Partnership about 6 years ago through an interagency agreement. So another really great way to ensure that you have a collaborative effort is by building an interagency agreement where each role and responsibility of the agency is clearly identified and then, visible to all. We renew that interagency agreement each year. In fact, it was just signed at the end of the fiscal year, and we're really excited to move forward. I'm really excited that my new colleague, Dr. Sarah Westerfield Brooks, is on this call. So shout out to Sarah. She is your contact for all things Ohio Transition Support Partnership, and you'll see her contact information here on the slide. So reach out to her. She's a wealth of information and just really excited to share as well. Another piece that we have established with Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities is a data sharing agreement. And through our data sharing agreement, we are able to match data from vocational rehabilitation and Department of Education to look at service delivery of students who were served by through an IEP or a 504 plan and are also receiving or have received vocational rehabilitation services. So while we know there are just myriad ways we can use those data, the big focus that we have currently is to identify underserved populations and make sure that we have an opportunity to really get services out to those students who may not have access as often as we would like to see them do that. And then finally, another piece that we are focusing on very specifically in Ohio is our pre-employment transition services. We have completed quite a few collaborative efforts with OOD around pre-employment transition services, including a really neat video that we put together. You can look on either OOD or Department of Ed's website and see a really cool video where we highlight how a school district and a provider and an employer were able to put together work-based learning pre-employment transition services and offer those during the middle of a school day to really ensure that students had kind of a streamlined set of services. So just a really cool experience there. And we continue to help our school districts and career centers think about ways that they could be pre-employment transition service providers. So lots of great work on the horizon between OOD and ODE as well. So please move on to the next slide. Thank you. And then the last two collaborative entities that I would like to showcase here would be our Ohio Employment First Task Force and our Ohio Secondary Transition Plan Steering Committee. Ohio is an employment first state. So through the Ohio Employment First Initiative, we are regulated or required, I should say, in Ohio to have an Ohio Employment First Task Force, which consists of a variety of state agencies whose main focus is to get together, reduce barriers to community employment for our students with disabilities, including those with the most significant disabilities, and then also align state policy. It would basically take me an entire presentation, if not an entire week, to show all of the incredible things that have come from our Ohio Employment First Task Force. But I did include the Ohio Employment First webpage on this slide. So check it out and look to see all the incredible work that's been done there, and also the agencies that have just been incredibly connected to that work. If you don't mind, yep, thank you. Just stay right there just for 1 second. And then the last piece I want to highlight is something that Dan also mentioned in terms of our collaborative group that we work on with the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, the collaborative, and that's our Ohio Secondary Transition Plan Steering Committee. We have an amazing group of cross-agency, cross-state agency individuals on our steering committee. We've been attending all of the capacity building institutes. We're bummed that we can't be in person. We're looking forward to hopefully going to Myrtle Beach and working together at the cadre in the mid-year because we just really love to be together that much. But our work overall with our plan has focused on family engagement for the past 3 years. And just last year, we had kind of a mini group of that Ohio Secondary Transition Plan Steering Committee put together an incredible learning series called Establishing Families as Partners in the Secondary Transition Planning Process. We have the research that shows the importance of family engagement, and we really wanted to take that work and get it out to the field and help them understand the importance of connecting with our families and engaging our families as best as possible. So last year, we were able to take this small work group that developed the training series and train about 70 individuals from 9 different state agencies to become this year's regional trainers. So we've got our state trainers. Now we have regional trainers who will form cross-agency teams and train local agency teams next year in this work. So excited about it. So many opportunities to really help get our common message across, and can't thank Catherine and her team enough at NTACT for really helping facilitate this work and making it the best that it really can be. If you want to go ahead to the very last slide, we do have our contact information, mine and Brenna Bartlett's. Please reach out to us. We'd love to talk with you more. We've just got a lot of things that are excited to share with you. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Catherine.
Amy, thanks so much. It's great to hear about all these things that I know have been in the works and are coming to fruition in the work about families. Will be a lovely transition into our next panelists as well. But you and Dan both have spoken about alignment and, really looking across your systems and where things, looking at policies and procedures and roles and responsibilities and all of those things that we know are really critical to successful collaboration. So thank you for sharing about that. As we move to our next panelists, I will remind folks to please, if you have questions, just clarifying questions, want to know a little bit more about something that you're hearing, please put those in the question box. And we also did have, I think a few of you have found these, but there's a few polls, 3 as a matter of fact, just to get a sense of what's happening in your sphere of the universe, whether you're with a state agency or local, in some cases probably not as much, or at another center, just to hear what's happening for students with disabilities in career and technical education. So we have a poll about that. I believe you will find these with a green arrow. You can respond to one poll and then move on to the next. The other poll just has to do generally about partnerships, so not just thinking about career and technical education and special education and vocational rehabilitation, but across or within your agency. Certainly the last year and a half have been a little bit challenging, possibly due to more socially distanced work environments, and so interested to know how that may have affected partnerships that you had in place, and maybe those have continued to be strong and maybe not. So interested to know about that. And then a third poll, which we'll talk a little bit more about at the end, but has to do with just what you are sort of envisioning as challenges moving forward for students, secondary students in particular, secondary students with disabilities in the coming months and year, which I think is informative for OSUP and for us as TA providers. So with that, I would like to not really shift gears, because we're certainly still talking about partnerships, but to hear from Hillary and Everett about work that they've been doing for a while to engage youth and families in the work at the state level in Pennsylvania and also down to the local level. So I will turn it over to Everett Deibler and Hillary Mangus.
Thanks, Catherine. So it's a funny joke. So Everett's been involved with this work. I have about 10 to 15 years on Everett, but he's been involved with this work a little bit longer than I have because he started as a youth, and we'll talk a little bit about what that looked like. But we're really excited to talk with you about what we're doing in Pennsylvania to engage youth. And so our work that started pre-me, but definitely involving Everett, really started to shift the focus in Pennsylvania to really consider, if we're talking about programs, if we're talking about practices, and we're talking about resources that would benefit youth, why are youth not at the table? And so Pennsylvania has made a really concerted effort over time to bring youth to the table, and we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. So next slide. So this work starts with PaTTAN, and a lot of people say, what is a PaTTAN, or what is PaTTAN? And PaTTAN really is the Training and Technical Assistance Network, and we provide training and technical assistance to the local education agencies as a partner of the Pennsylvania Department of Education and Bureau of Special Education. And a lot of the work that we do, if not most of the work we do, is aligned to the State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report and other Bureau priority projects. And so I was counting as I was waiting. I think we're up to 28 initiatives, and I can't even keep track of the number of projects that we have. But the work that we're doing and the work that we do with youth engagement really comes out of our transition initiative, because we know through evidence-based practices that when we prepare students to have awareness of their disability, to be able to advocate for their needs and wants, and to understand and have a seat at the table, that the outcomes are better. So this is all driven based on outcomes data, and so we work together collaboratively to move our data forward. Next slide, please. We do that again through working with local education agencies. In what we're fortunate in Pennsylvania to have is the PaTTAN system, where we have 14 consultants who are dedicated to doing work for secondary transition. We also are really unique in that we have 29 intermediate units that also have at least 1.0 full-time equivalent of a transition consultant to work with the local education agency. So we work with the IU TAC, we also work with the local education agencies, and we really work to build their capacity to deliver services to students receiving special education. Next slide, please. And we do that through our commitment to the least restrictive environment, where we're really thinking about how to provide services to students in the general education setting using supplementary aids and services before considering a more restrictive environment, and especially in the work that we do in secondary transition and the outcome of preferred and first, thinking about competitive integrated employment. Thinking about the least restrictive environment early and at the beginning is so important in the work that we do to build skills for students to be competitively employed when they graduate. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Everett so he can give you a little background on PYLN.
Sure. So, and PYLN, I'm reading this mission, Hillary, and I know that it's evolved over the last almost 2 decades, and we'll get more into that. But right now, the current mission of the network is to coordinate a network of youth-led, youth-driven, inclusive organizations of just across Pennsylvania, across our state. But PYLN promotes advocacy, self-determination, leadership, empowerment, and service learning in the areas of transition, employment, education, and community engagement. And next slide, please. And right now, currently, and I say right now because we'll talk about how PYLN really was a grassroots effort started by the Bureau of Special Education 18 years ago. But right now, we're proud to say that we have developed a structure that includes a governing board of youth and young adults who then support affiliate groups who are in their local communities doing work that is relevant to their communities. But again, they're all youth-led and youth-driven initiatives. And so we thought, if we're going to be a network, it's a network of what exactly, right? So we had to create that space where you have governing board youth leadership, then you have youth running and being supported by adults in their communities to run youth-led, youth-driven organizations, whether it be in their school, a community agency, a higher ed institution. It just depends. But again, the initiatives and things they undertake are relevant to their local area, because Pennsylvania is a very big state. We have some very urban areas and some very rural areas. And so we want to make sure that people are doing things that are relevant to them to promote the mission and vision of PYLN. And then our one thing that I'm really proud of about PYLN, and now being an adult ally, having aged from being a youth that has been a part of this to now supporting it as an ally, is the number of supporting partners, which PaTTAN is one that PYLN currently has. We are not a 501c3. We do not have nonprofit status, but we have a fiscal a partnership with our state's PTI, our Parent Training Information Center. So they help us there. PaTTAN supports us in other ways. We have worked with our state VR. We have worked with Centers for Independent Living over the course of time. And so we are really, really happy to say that PYLN is this awesome organization that's had the ability to work with so many people and learn about collaboration by doing it. And that's why Hillary was like, Everett's been doing this for a really, really long time. I feel like I grew up on cross-agency collaboration, and I've taken that to every job I've had in my career. And I find that it's so important to engage youth in this whole process and to help them understand the system so early. And so next slide, please. Looking at how PYLN started, I mentioned the current mission and vision and what PYLN supports currently. But when PYLN started, or was an idea 18 years ago, the Bureau of Special Ed in Pennsylvania wanted a long-standing youth-led, youth-driven presence for youth with disabilities across Pennsylvania. And that started by having youth attend our state transition conference. And then the Bureau said, hey, PaTTAN, we'll give you some funding to allow the small group of youth that you've identified to run an event called the Youth Outcome Expo. And that's where I was introduced to what PYLN was, and the YO event, as we called it, was the first event that I ever did. And we did this awesome event, and it was really, really neat to work with folks from the Bureau on coordinating that and getting to meet folks from OVR and learning about the system, but also giving our perspective as a young adult in that space and running the event. So we did the event all those years ago, and then we came together again and said, hey, that was really fun. Now what do we do? And so PYLN then set their own goals and their own things they wanted to do. So we did secondary transition toolkits, webinar series. We did events. We've attended the NTEC CBI. I think I've been there like 1,000 times, Catherine, right? It's almost like family to me to be over there. But PYLN really started to become an expert in providing this guidance when it comes to transition. That's why our current mission, or their current mission, always holds on to transition in some way, because it is the fabric or the foundation of what PYLN is and why it exists in the first place. So the group originally started as a group of young adults with disabilities only. And then when the world moves to inclusion, we're like, well, if we're going to promote inclusion, the governing board and all its structure has to be that way too. And it's allowed us to expand to affiliates and do different things. But I think I'm going to turn it over to Hillary for the next slide to talk about how it's going and kind of how our partnership with PaTTAN has evolved over the course of time.
Great, thanks. Next slide. Perfect. So in terms of how it's going, just like any relationship, there are ebbs and flows and ups and downs. And our relationship with youth engagement is no different, and with PYLN. So what happened over time is that there was a leadership and turnover and staffing. And then as we saw the value in the work that the PYLN youth and young adults were providing to the work that we do, we began to have higher demands, higher asks. And so from that, we decided to enter into a memorandum of understanding contract with the PYLN for the fiscal support we provide to them. And really what that did was say, you're providing professional services to us. You are giving us the value of your expertise, your experience, your lived experience, and we're valuing that as part of the organization. That your organization has something very real to contribute. So through that memorandum of understanding, we really worked to establish what those deliverables that we would be asking of youth and young adults through PYLN would be. So next slide, and Everett can walk you through a little bit about what some of that has looked like.
Sure. And so I think this is our third year of doing a contract, or doing an MOU, I should say. And so, like I said, PYLN kind of started as this grassroots thing, and we were being asked to do this. And the other thing that's really important to say is that everyone who is a governing board member or on an affiliate is volunteering their time. The only people that were being paid are the adult allies that were supporting it. And to be honest, the governing board and everybody a part of the organization decided to keep it that way. But PaTTAN provides fiscal support to us for these deliverables, and it's really allowed us to understand what PaTTAN is looking for, and then to set plans with the governing board and with our affiliates to get things done. So the MOU this year includes being a part of our state leadership team on transition, so our community of practice. We have a representative from PYLN on those meetings. We participate in almost all of our transition-related webinar series, whether it be presenting or providing content that would be there. We're really, really proud that we have a governing board member attend the NTech CBI every year that it happens. And this year that it was virtual the last 2 years, we've been able to have 2 youth attend and kind of be a part of that virtual experience and really helping to drive what our state plan becomes. We support other grants. We are doing this really awesome project in Pennsylvania called Transition Discoveries, which is helping schools to identify the gaps they have within their areas for transition and helping them map out what resources could be available or what new things need to be created. And a lot of those schools identify youth engagement as one of the gaps that they have. And so we've literally been able to we're working on trying to get to schools locally to help them be better at youth and young adult engagement. And so these just, again, we're creating a new website, PaSecondaryTransition.com, and PYLN is a part of all of those discussions too. And I really can't emphasize enough how much we really are. Like, I would say it's been a joy for me to get to know so many of these professionals in my role with PYLN, and it's helped me to grow professionally, but it's literally helping people create networks and opportunities, but also showing that their voice has value in these spaces. But PaTTAN treats PYLN as a professional contractor, and we submit invoices and reports and do that as a group together. And so it's been a labor of love, I know, for Hillary and I to try to make this happen. But it really does help make sure that youth and young adults are at the table, and they're not only valued just for being there, but also monetarily to support the work of an organization.
And I think, Everett, I just want to highlight, I think the value of the work that you did really came into focus this year, and over the last 2 years, really, as we worked with our partners at the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation to update our memorandum of understanding with them. But through that, we also wanted to make that memorandum of understanding accessible to youth and families. And so Everett and the PYLN team have been really critical in helping to work with us to make sure that what we present to the field is understandable to youth and families, that the resources that we put out are understandable to youth and families, and that they're useful. Not just that they're understandable, but that they're things that youth and family can turn to understand the transition from school age into adult services, to understand things that OVR can provide to them. It's been definitely a labor of love, but I think the value of the work that the Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network provided to our state, you can see that this is a big list. These are big asks, and they really step up to the table and really deliver. This year, PYLN had an intern that they supported, and she was like the face of transition in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, poor girl.
So it's been really wonderful to see just the amount of growth and the way that we can expand. And I laugh and say that every time I open my mouth, something new and bigger happens in transition. And that's really true. You know, just when we think we've kind of done it all, we kind of grow and think of new things and new ways. And in fact, before today's call, Everett and I were just talking about another new way that we hope to expand the youth presence in Pennsylvania. And that is through a partnership with our Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. We're in talks. It's very beginning stages, but we're looking at having youth ambassadors across the state in Pennsylvania that would partner with our local intermediate units, with the Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network, and then do work at the statewide level with PaTTAN to be the youth voice in all of this work. So we're really excited about that. Next slide, please.
And I think that the relationships are so key to this. When I think about PYLN's evolution over the last 18 years, it is a thing where the adults that are in the room have to realize that growth and learning happens both ways, right? And you have to be open to that. And it's about the adults setting the boundary or the parameter of what can be offered and supported through the resources that are had, but then allowing those youth to voice their opinion in those spaces and having meetings where youth can really voice their opinion and feel like they can be in a room full of what youth would say are suits, right? Or old people, right? Which I am one now. But the growth happens both ways. And that perspective brings change. And it almost fosters this idea that the adults are not in the lead or taking charge. They are your allies. That's why PYLN uses the term adult ally, because Hillary can tell you that working with youth, it's almost like it is a very like reciprocal conversation, right? It goes both ways. And so that brings change. And then through that, PYLN has just grown and exploded. And it's been an 18-year journey, but having this partnership in place, I cannot stress enough how much it makes the youth that are involved feel value and feel like their voice matters in all the perspectives.
You know, and I think on the flip side of that is that we've also benefited as a state system by thinking in different ways and thinking that just the resources that we're providing weren't youth friendly and weren't family friendly. The vocabulary, the acronyms, it just even the way it was presented visually. And so being able to take that perspective. But at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is you have to come to the table. And I think some of our previous presenters and panelists said this, everybody has something to contribute. Everybody has the right to have their voice represented. And I think by coming to the table, knowing that you don't know everything and knowing that someone else at the table has an expertise that can benefit the work that you're doing has been, you know, the biggest part of how these relationships have evolved and grown over time.
And the nice thing for me to say is that it's awesome to know, based on what we've done, that youth are almost just expected to be in the room now. And so the tenor of the way things are presented, or people take their time and patience to explain things, it's almost part of the fabric of what we do, which is what it's about. And so I appreciate that more than I can express.
So because we're there, I saw that a question came in about why the governing board doesn't seek compensation when the adult allies do. So the adult allies don't receive compensation through any funds that PYLN receives. They are receiving compensation because it's part of their job. So for example, I would be considered an adult ally for PYLN. That's my job. I work at PaTTAN. The relationship is part of my job expectations. However, the youth that we're talking about expanding to the youth ambassadors, those positions would be paid work experiences through OVR. So there will then be, and the intern last year through PYLN was also compensated. Yes. Yep. So the youth and the young adults telling their story are now being compensated. That's been something that has evolved, I think, for us over time, to understand the importance that they're professionally speaking about their experiences, and they deserve to be compensated for that. So
well. And truth be told, the reason why we didn't, well, I say we because I was part of this discussion back then, was because PYLN wanted to build up a fund of unrestricted funds that they could do anything with. And that would be sponsoring their own events. If they wanted to pay for a DJ or a ice cream bar at a conference, there was no restriction on how that money was used. We could just do those things. And so we thought it was better to give the money to the organization to be able to expand what we were doing. And so, but now we're at a place where compensation for the work of youth is definitely on the table, but it was a decision that PYLN made years ago to try to establish this new structure and focus as these contracts were coming in. And so it was literally just a choice of the young adults, was they wanted to build the organization up first and then look at this next step.
Okay, next slide, please. So we just wanted to close with this thought that, and PYLN and the partnership with PaTTAN and really their model, I think this kind of actually ties back into, you know, why they chose not to, is that they're really looking to mentor and grow the next generation of youth allies and youth leadership. And so they do that because you're giving someone the chance to have their voice heard, and you're giving the chance for a new perspective to be heard. I think we'll turn it back over to you, Catherine.
Thank you all so much. I've heard this story, but it's exciting to hear kind of that evolution and and new things that are coming out of the work that I didn't even know about. So that's so I appreciate you all sharing that, and thank you for the questions that are coming in. There was one question, I want to get to that, and then I'll circle back to the poll, but there was a question, so you guys answered a question that came in specifically about the youth compensation. Another question came in for Amy and Dan, focused on the work that you've done with CTE, wondering what the partnerships have been like in your state related to either of the with the state deafblind projects and any of the work that's been occurring related to career tech ed. So I guess we'll flip for those that are running this behind the scenes for Amy and Dan to be able to respond to that question. Put you on the spot.
And here we are. I'll just go ahead and dive into the void. There is a full-throated relationship, full-on relationship with the Oregon School for the Deaf within CTE in Oregon. They have 2 CTE programs of study, one in communications, one in one of my favorite areas, which is carpentry and construction. And we interact as we approve programs and work with them. So that's a very robust relationship there. The other one is a little different. The Oregon legislature closed the School for the Blind in 2009 and established a separate fund called the Oregon Blind and Visually Impaired Student Fund, which funds support for blind and visually impaired students through our education service districts around the state. And so the crosswalk would be in that area. The other thing I'll say very quickly is that the School for the Deaf, make sure I get all my connections right here, falls underneath the umbrella of the Enhancing Student Opportunities group. So we have that tie in that way as well.
Mm-hmm. And I would just add that we are also collaborating with the Ohio Center for Autism and Low Incidence, which has our outreach center for deafness and blindness. And their transition contact, Heather Herbster, sits on many of our task force and committees. So is very closely working with us on all of these activities.
Okay, thank you. So please continue to ask questions in the chat. In the meantime, if our behind the scenes people, if we can go back to where we left off with the PowerPoint. And actually maybe go one more slide forward and we'll get to the Q&A, but I do have results from our polls. So it looks like related to the question, which was in your context, how engaged are students with disabilities in career and technical education, which, as you might remember, was the focus of our first 3 panelists. It sounds like for most of you, there's been some successes. For many, it's a challenge, but having conversations. And then for fewer, it's the same for students with and without disabilities or not. So kind of those 2 extremes. It's a little bit of a bell curve, right, based on that question. And then related to the second poll, and I'm trying to follow this in our chat over here. So related to the second poll, just in general, your partnerships over the last 18 months, for the vast majority of you, good intentions, have some work to do now and moving forward, which probably is not a big surprise, but a decent chunk of you feel that you never skipped a beat and wouldn't have made it without our partners. And so that may be sort of a good segue to our panelists for you to speak in your own, you all have just been spending the last hour and a half basically talking about partnerships. If you have experienced challenges with those partnerships during the COVID experience and how you've pushed through those, or if because of the partnerships that you had in place, you really never missed a beat. So interested to hear from any of our panelists about that. And kind of reflecting back to Dennis was talking about more regional and across states and the work that's going on in Alabama. And then moving on through our panelists. So if any of you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I'm here, so I'll just speak to it. So one thing that was a significant impact is that we try to meet as a group face-to-face. And because we are a collaboration between 2 entities in 2 very different regions, we typically will meet one time a year in Alabama or in the Southeast, and then 6 months later or about that time, we'll meet on site in Rochester, New York. That's really been a significant improvement in our communication and understanding how the team works. And with COVID and those travel restrictions, I have noticed that there's a little bit of a disconnect, but I think everybody is experiencing that disconnect. So that's important to me, is that the ways that we approach things in a COVID environment has been different, but the disconnect between the team members took a little time to get past, because everybody transitioned to a virtual environment. And it was just much more helpful to have people who can communicate and have that human connection.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. We're all going to pop in.
You don't really know when you're going to be in the show. I can go ahead since I popped up. It's just a very interesting situation. I would say, in all sincerity, we really didn't miss a beat in many of our partnerships. Now, aside again from the fact of just being really sad that we weren't able to get together in person, because we do enjoy hanging out, the fact that we had standard, meeting times already on the calendar, that we had very specific roles and responsibilities outlined in our interagency agreements with very clear timelines for when we needed to have things accomplished, we were really able to keep moving forward. Now, I can't say that, 4.5 years ago, especially, when we were starting our work with the career tech teams, had we been able to maintain that same level of collaboration, I would say no, because we really didn't have those structures in place. But now that we do, it was just really easy to be able to lean on those when times got tough.
Good. Well, I think it looks like we have another specific question that's come in for Hillary and Everett, just asking if you have a training program that the youth leader, like a specific training program that you guys.
I can answer how this works.
Okay.
And so within PYLN, so what happens when a school, community agency, or college wants to join and have an affiliate group? They get access to a affiliate only space that provides training materials and different things on how to run meetings, ideas for the adult allies on how to support that, and different things that we have used to train youth that they can use it the way they want to. But one thing that we do annually is have a summit where groups can work together to do, we developed, people have heard of person-centered planning before. We developed group-centered plans so that a group can come together with their adult allies and plan out what they want to do with their group in the future and down the road. And so we don't like to try to tell people what to do. We give them the resources to be able to use those the way they see fit. And so,
and I would add, we don't have a prescribed curriculum necessarily for youth development, right? But we bring together many resources, and I think Everett highlighted Transition Discoveries is our big push right now in Pennsylvania, and then we partner our PaSecondaryTransition.com website with Transition Discoveries. So PaSecondaryTransition.com is for the adult allies working with the youth, and Transition Discoveries is more geared toward the youth and young adults. And so the resources kind of support and supplement each other, but there is a whole strand based on research that came out of a Developmental Disability Council grant that talks about what are critical components. One of the indicators is youth development and youth engagement, and different components of that. So there are resources, lesson plans, and things to support that. So I would encourage you to look at transitiondiscoveries.org and PaSecondaryTransition.com for resources.
Well, thank you all. And I know we won't all speak at once, but I'll still ask our tech person to bring us all up as we close out. So there's not, I think we're at the moment of probably not taking further questions, but you do have a handout that has everybody's contact information. If you all are interested in following up, as you've heard from everyone, please do that. You can also look at your screen here for the contact information, and you can reach out to any of us. And I've taken notes on the brilliant nuggets that you all have shared. So if allowed, I'm going to see about posting just some of those takeaways of, getting started with partnerships. What are those initial steps? How do we sustain the work? Because I do see that being critical as we move into this, coming year, and the challenges for schools and families and sort of getting back into the work. It looks like from our poll, most people see that widened gap in access and progress for students from historically marginalized populations within the population of students with disabilities is probably one of the biggest challenges moving forward. I think there's at least been initial documentation for that students with disabilities are even more challenged than all students may have been in this last 18 months. And then I think we know there's some particular populations within that who likely have even greater challenges. So being attentive to that moving forward, and then sort of equal concern with some of the other areas that we mentioned in that poll. But those widened gaps, I think, are something that we'll all be needing to attend to and relying on our partners to do that. So thank you all very much. I really appreciate your time and willingness to do this. And thanks everybody who's been engaged and asking questions, and please do follow up. So with that, enjoy the rest of your afternoon and engaging in more networking and other sessions together. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.